Hello everyone, today on Grammatically Correct it's all about complex sentences. In order to create complex sentences, you have to know how to create four things, and those four things are the independent clause, the subordinate clause, the relative clause, and the participial phrase. We'll start with the independent clause. The independent clause is the foundation for all complex sentences. It must be able to stand alone as a simple sentence. You should be able to build upon it by adding phrases and clauses, and always remember A, triple A. The first A, of course, stands for the actor of the independent clause, the second stands for the action of the independent clause, and the third is what I call the answer of the independent clause. So for this particular independent clause, we're going to make our actor the hipster teacher. The action we're going to give him is lectured. And what will he lecture about? Well, we'll have him lecture about the French Revolution. If we put all those things together, we get an independent clause. The hipster teacher lectured about the French Revolution. It can stand alone as a simple sentence, and we're going to learn how to build on it soon. If you need a review on independent clauses, please go back and watch Lesson 1, the independent clause, on Grammatically Correct, and that will tell you all about the different types of actors, actions, and answers. Okay, our next independent clause is going to start with the actor, his voice. What will his voice be doing? Well, his voice mesmerized. And who or what did it mesmerize? His voice mesmerized the class. Put your period down, you have AAA, you're done. Our next actor is going to be the students. What will they be doing? Well, the students listened. Now, if you read that, the students listened, and you put a period down, it makes sense. It's a complete idea. All independent clauses must have actors and actions. A lot of them will sometimes need answers, and sometimes they won't need answers. You have to read and hear it for yourself and decide if you want to keep going or not. But the students listened is an independent clause. It is a simple sentence. Our last independent clause is going to begin with the pronoun he. He is standing in for the hipster teacher. What will he be doing? Well, he would like. Now, would like is called a verb phrase, what I call an action phrase. It's two verbs working together. What would he like? Well, he would like to be at a karaoke bar. Just make sure you have at least one actor, at least one action, and check to see if you need an answer as well, and then you're creating independent clauses. Once you know how to create independent clauses, creating subordinate clauses is a piece of cake. All you have to do is take any single independent clause. For example, he sipped his green tea like a boss, and put what we call a subordinating conjunction in front of it. Now here's a list of some subordinating conjunctions. So if I take the word while, for example, and I put it in front of my independent clause, and I lowercase the he, of course, and I get rid of the period, I've changed my independent clause into a subordinate clause. It's no longer a simple sentence. It can no longer stand alone, but we're going to learn what we can do with it later on in the presentation. Let's try this with three more independent clauses. So we're going to take he prefers discussing Space Odyssey films, and we're going to change that into even though he prefers discussing Space Odyssey films. We're going to take he speaks loudly and turn it into whenever he speaks loudly, and he wanted to share his knowledge will turn into because he wanted to share his knowledge. Now I'm going to go back and lowercase all the actors and get rid of the periods because remember, these are no longer independent clauses. These are subordinate clauses. Creating relative clauses takes one extra step. Rather than simply adding something onto an independent clause, we're going to take something out of the independent clause, and then we're going to replace that something with a relative pronoun. Here are the relative pronouns: that, who, whose, whosoever, which, whichever. So as we did when we were creating subordinate clauses, let's begin with some independent clauses. So I'm going to take each of these independent clauses and I'm going to replace the actor with an appropriate relative pronoun. So he is an avid fan of steampunk. The actor is he. I'm going to replace that with who is an avid fan of steampunk. It is his least favorite historical period. The actor is it. I'm going to replace that with which is his least favorite historical period. It happened long ago. The actor is it. I'm going to replace it with that happened long ago. I could have used which here, but I decided to go with the word that. A student interrupts him. The actor is a student. Let's replace that random student with whosoever interrupts him. It is more important. The actor is it. Let's replace it with whichever is more important. And finally, his lecture is always fascinating. The actor is his lecture. I'm going to replace that with which is always fascinating. So all these independent clauses, we have turned them into relative clauses. Participial phrases are different than clauses. Two things you need to know right away. First of all clauses must have actors and actions working together. They must. Phrases, on the other hand, never have actors and actions working together. They might have an actor, they might have an action, but they never have both. Now, in order to create a participial phrase, which is basically a phrase that describes something, you need to follow these steps. First of all, you begin with a verb infinitive, something like to run, to jump, to swim. Then you plug that verb infinitive into the sentence, either the girl or the boy was blank. So you might get something like the girl was to run. Now, obviously, that doesn't make sense. So your next step is to make it make sense. Now you might say the girl was running, okay? Running is your participle. It is describing the girl. It is not a verb. Then you provide at least one answer. The girl was running to the mall. Then you erase everything in front of the participle running, and you get something like running to the mall. That's your participial phrase. Let's do a couple to make sure we get it. So again, remember, first begin with your verb infinitive. We're going to begin with to listen, and we're going to plug that into the girl was. And we're going to get something like the girl was to listen. The girl was listen. Again, this doesn't make sense. So we're going to make it make sense. We're going to change it to the girl was listening. Listening is the participle describing girl. Now we're going to give it an answer. The girl was listening to whom? She was listening to her hipster teacher. This is an independent clause. We have an actor, an action, and an answer. What we're going to do is erase the actor and the helping verb was, and then what you're left with is the participial phrase, listening to her hipster teacher. In this next example, we're going to begin with the verb infinitive to arm, and we'll plug it into the sentence, the boy was to arm, or the boy was armed. Again, this doesn't make sense. So, the boy was armed. Okay, now let's give it an answer. The boy was armed with what? He was armed with a laser pointer. We have our independent clause. Remove the actor, remove the helping verb, and you get your participial phrase, armed with a laser pointer. Now, sometimes your verb infinitive can go two different ways. The verb infinitive to lose, I could say the boy was losing, the boy was lost. In this example, we're going to say the boy was losing. What was he losing? The boy was losing his mind. If I remove the actor and the helping verb, the participial phrase is going to be losing his mind. But if I were to change that to the boy was lost, I could say the boy was lost where? Well, he was lost in the park, and now our participial phrase is going to be lost in the park. So remember, sometimes the infinitive verb can go in different directions, but if you follow the formula, you'll still create a good participial phrase. Now that we know how to create relative clauses, subordinate clauses, and participial phrases, how do we add it on to an independent clause, what I like to call a foundational clause? Well, let's go back to our original independent clause, the hipster teacher lectured about the French Revolution. Now, we have an actor, we have an action, and we have an answer. So how do we build on it? The first place you might want to add information is in front of the independent clause, in front of the actor. When you add information here, it should probably be a participial phrase followed by a comma or a subordinate clause followed by a comma. And it should probably be describing the actor. Another place you might want to add information is between the actor and the action. And the information here should also probably be describing the actor. You might put two adjectives with a comma before and after them. You might put a participial phrase here with a comma before and after it, or a relative clause with who or which as the relative pronoun, depending, of course, if your actor is a person or a thing. And then if your actor is a thing, you might also use something called a that clause. If you have a that clause that kind of stretches out your actor, you will not need a comma. And we'll look at some examples in a bit. The last place you might want to add information is at the end of the independent clause. If you put a participial phrase or a relative clause at the end of the independent clause, you must set it off with a comma. However, if you add a subordinate clause at the end of the independent clause, the subordinating conjunction removes the need for a comma, so you will not need a comma. And the same with the that clause, which again we're going to look at. If you have a that clause that kind of stretches out the answer, you will not need a comma. Now, when you make your participial phrases, relative clauses, and subordinate clauses for this activity, make sure they relate to your foundational clause in some way, otherwise you'll get some pretty weird sentences. So let's start with the top left box. We're going to put a couple participial phrases up there. We'll start with slapping the board for emphasis and armed with a laser pointer. Either of these could describe the hipster teacher. A subordinate clause that might work there is while he sipped his green tea. In the next box, our two adjectives are going to be ironic yet humorless. We'll throw in the participial phrase obsessed with SpongeBob conspiracy theories. This probably will not exactly fit with the sentence, but we're going to have some fun with it. Our relative clause will be who is an avid fan of the space odyssey genre. Again, we'll throw this in there just to see what happens. Our that clause won't work in this case because our hipster teacher is a person, not a thing, so you wouldn't use a that clause here, so we'll leave that alone. In the last box, we're going to put speaking enthusiastically to his students as our participial phrase. Our relative clause will be which is his favorite historical period, obviously referring to the French Revolution. The subordinate clause is going to be even though he prefers the Elizabethan era, and we can't use a that clause here. It might run the sentence on a little bit, but we're going to throw in that happened long ago. So let's put this all together. We're going to take from the top left box, and we're going to take slapping the board for emphasis. We're going to move it on down in front of the independent clause. We're going to set it off with a comma, and our new complex sentence is going to read, slapping the board for emphasis, the hipster teacher lectured about the French Revolution. Let's try another one. This time we're going to add two adjectives between the actor and the action. We're going to take ironic yet humorless, and we're going to move it on down. We're going to set it off with commas, and our new complex sentence is going to read, "The hipster teacher, ironic yet humorless, lectured about the French Revolution." And of course, the last place we can add on to the independent clause is at the end. We're going to take speaking enthusiastically to students, and we're going to move that on down. When it's a participial phrase, you must set it off with a comma. And our newest complex sentence is going to read, "The hipster teacher lectured about the French Revolution, speaking enthusiastically to his students." Now, in all honesty, this does kind of have a run-on feel, maybe a dangling modifier feel, because speaking enthusiastically to students is technically modifying the actor, the hipster teacher, and it's really far away from it. But sometimes you get away with it, and sometimes you can't. You have to read the sentence and ask yourself, does it sound okay? Does it make sense? And if it does, keep it. If not, try something different. Now, what's really cool about this is you don't have to just take from one of the boxes above. You can take from more than one of the boxes above. So let's take "while he sipped his green tea" from the top left box, and "who is considered by many to be a karaoke legend," and we're going to move them down to their appropriate places. We're going to set them off with commas, and our new sentence reads, "While he sipped green tea, the hipster teacher, who is considered by many to be a karaoke legend, lectured about the French Revolution." And then if you want to get really serious, you can take from all three boxes. You can choose whichever phrases or clauses you want, move them on down to your foundational clause. Don't forget to set them off with commas if necessary. And your new sentence might read something like, "Wearing thick frame glasses, the hipster teacher, serious and dedicated, lectured about the French Revolution, which is an important historical event." Now, when you make these complex sentences, there are some problems that you might run into. First, let's talk about those that clauses that I mentioned earlier. We're going to take the that clause that happened long ago, and we're going to move it to the end of our foundational clause. So our new complex sentence is going to read, "The hipster teacher lectured about the French Revolution that happened long ago." You'll notice there's no comma there. Now, the problem with the that clause is that sometimes it kind of gives a sentence a run-on feel. This one's not too bad, but if you do feel like that sentence is running on a bit too long, sometimes the best thing to do is just remove the that clause altogether. Now, if you want to put the that clause between the actor and the action, your actor must be a thing. So we're going to take our independent clause and we're going to change it to, "The lecture should be streamed for the masses." Now the actor is the lecture. It's a thing. And we're going to take the that clause from the second box there. We're going to move it down between the actor and the action. And our new sentence is going to read, "The lecture that was witnessed by the students should be streamed for the masses." Again, because it is a that clause, you do not need commas here. Just make sure it makes sense and that it sounds good. Another thing you want to make sure is that your participial phrases, subordinate clauses, and relative clauses make sense. Otherwise, you're going to have some pretty weird sentences. Something like, "Overcome with emotion, the hipster teacher, who enjoys the beach, lectured about the French Revolution that is interesting." Now, besides the fact that this sentence runs on with the that clause at the end of it, we also really don't need to know that he enjoys the beach at this point. What we need to know about is what he's doing at this moment as he is lecturing about the French Revolution. So always check those phrases, clauses, and make sure they fit in with your foundation clause and it makes sense. Okay, everyone, that's all for today. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Grammatically Correct, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.